We are going to be factoring trinomials by completing the square in this lesson. So first we're going to do a little bit of review on some past lessons and other few concepts. So in the last lesson you had a trinomial and you learned how to factor that. So this would be x plus 2 times x plus 3 equals 0. Then you set each one equal to 0 and solve for x. X plus 3 equals 0, minus 3, minus 3, so x equals negative 3. So that's what we had here. We were trying to find out what values for x, when I substitute them into the equation, it comes out to be equal to 0. And we found out that negative 2 and negative 3, when I substitute those in for x, that our equation would equal 0. And one other thing we're going to quick review is if we have a square root of, let's say, 25. Square root of 25 means what times itself would give me 25? Well, 5 does. But so does negative 5, because negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. So really we can have plus and a negative the square root of 25. So that means we can have 5 and negative 5. So we'll also be using that concept of the square roots in our lesson today. So we'll have a positive number and a negative number when we have square roots, because when we take the number times itself, we get that number inside the radical sign there. So today we're going to be working with perfect square trinomials. So if we have two factors like this, and if we applied the FOIL, we'd end up with x squared plus 3x plus 3x plus 9. So we'd have x squared plus 6x plus 9. Or if we had x minus 4 times x minus 4, we'd have x squared minus 4x plus 16. So we have x squared minus 8x plus 16. So those are perfect square trinomials because right here, those are perfect squares, meaning some number times itself gave me 9. Same way here, some number times itself gave me 16. So we're looking for numbers that at the end there, the C part, this 9, this 16, when you take it times itself, some number times itself, we get those number there. So that's why they're called perfect square trinomials, because we squared a number and got those last numbers, 9 and 16. So another way to write the factors then would be like x plus 3 squared and x minus 4 squared. Instead of going x plus 3 times x plus 3 or x minus 4 times x minus 4, we can write it using the square sign on there. Another way I can look to see if these are perfect square trinomials are, if I look at this middle term, the 6, if I take half of that, which would be 3, and then square it, I get that last term up here, which is 9. Same way here, if I take that middle term, negative 8, take half of that, which would be negative 4, and square that, negative 4 times negative 4 is 16, I get that number up there. So that's how I know these are perfect square trinomials, because I can take half of the middle term, square that answer, and get my last term up there, like the 9 and the 16. Also, I can look at the problem. In the x squared plus 6x plus 9, I have two positives. I have this one here, plus sign, this plus. I'm looking at this one right here, and that will tell me if this is going to be a plus in here or not. So this one is a minus, so then I knew that this was going to be a minus. So if I have a plus and a plus, it's going to be a plus. If I have a minus here and a plus here, then it's going to be a minus there. Alright, in the previous page we found out that if we take the middle term, this term right here, that coefficient there, take half of it and square it. So we take half of that middle term, that coefficient, which is 5, and then square it, that equals our last term, which is the C. So that would be 25 there. So then, since that is a perfect square trinomial, then my answer would be x plus 5 times x plus 5, or it would be x plus 5 squared. That's how you'd write that. Another one would be, let's say we had x squared minus 12x plus 36. Take half of the middle term. That'd be negative 6. Square that, and we got 36. So that's how we got that. So it would be then, and you notice from before, then I have a minus and a plus, so it's going to be x minus 6 squared. Let's try one other one here. Let's say I had x squared minus 14x plus c. I need to find out what that c is. Take the middle term, negative 14. Take half of that, which would be negative 7. Square that, which would be 49. So this c would be 49 then. And I have a minus and a plus, so then it would be x minus 7 squared. Alright, so we're going to try our very first completing the square. As you can see now that, excuse me, our last term, the negative 40, is not a perfect square trinomial. So we need to make this whole equation into a perfect square trinomial. So we want it to look like the ones we just did on the previous page. Since it's not in that form, we need to manipulate it or do some things to it to make it look like that. So the first thing you do is take your last term here, which is this minus 40, and you want to put it on the other side. So I'm going to add 40 to both sides. So I have x squared minus 6x, and we're going to leave a blank. You need to leave a space here because we're going to put a number in there eventually. So you leave a space because we took out the negative 40, so we're going to leave a space there. We put it over there. Now we're going to take, to make it a perfect square of trinomial, we just found out that I can take the middle term, take half of it, which would be negative 3, square that, and that would give me 9, and that's what we're going to put inside there. So then we add 9, because that's what's going to go in there. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do the other. That's the way it is in algebra all the time. So now I do have a perfect square trinomial right there, because I can take half of the middle term, negative 6 divided by 2, square it and get 9. So my answer here, I get a minus and a plus, so it would be x minus 3 squared equals, and 40 plus 9 is 49. Alright, now to get rid of the square there, you take the square root, because it was the inverse. So if I take the square root of this side and the square root of that side, the square root and the 2, the square, cancel each other out, so I just have x minus 3. And I remember from the very first couple pages, plus or minus the square root of 49. Now write the rest over here then. So x minus 3 equals plus or minus square root of 49 is 7. So now I have plus 3 to both sides, so I'd have x equals 3 plus 7 and 3 minus 7. So that's going to give me 10, and that's going to give me negative 4. So x equals 10 and negative 4. So those are my answers, and that would be what makes this, if I substitute those in for x in both of the terms in there, or the x values, then I would get 0. Alright, so on this one here, they've already put the negative 24 or the minus 24 on the other side for me. So they've already done some of the work. It was started out with equal to 0, but they've already put it on the other side for me. So now we have x squared plus 11x, leave our blank space, equals negative 24. So I take half of the middle term and then square it. So half of the middle term, 11 halves, square that, it would have then plus 121 over 4. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So this is now a perfect square trinomial. This whole thing is now a perfect square trinomial because I took half of the middle term, squared it, and then got 121, just like I did on the previous page. So my answer here is going to be x plus 11 squared, or 11 over 2 squared equals, and I have to find a common denominator here, and the common denominator would be 4, so I have to multiply this by 4. So that'd be negative 96 fourths plus 121 fourths, which is going to be then 25 fourths. So I have 25 fourths. take the square root of both sides. So if I take the square root, it cancels out this square. So I have x plus 11 halves equals plus or minus the square root of 25 fourths. So I have x plus 11 halves equals plus or minus the square root of 25 fourths is 25, square root of 25 over the square root of 4, which is then 5 halves. Minus 11 halves from both sides. So I have x equals negative 11 halves plus 5 halves and negative 11 halves minus 5 halves. I already have a common denominator, so I don't have to worry about that. So negative 11 halves plus 5 halves is negative 6 halves, which is negative 3. And negative 11 halves minus 5 halves is negative 16 halves, which is negative 8. So x equals negative 3 and negative 8. So those are my values for when I put those into my equation, that it would make my equation equal to 0. Alright, so if you notice on all the other problems, my coefficient on my first term were all 1s. So this term on all the other ones was a 1, and that's the only way you can use completing the square. That term, that coefficient right there, has to be a 1 in order for you to use completing the square. So if it's not, we have to get rid of that to make it a 1, so that's what we're going to do on this one. So first I'm going to add 30 to both sides, because you have to get rid of that c term. So I have 2x squared plus 4x. Leave our blank equals 30. And now to make this 1, I'm going to divide everything by 2, because that cancels out and makes it a 1. So now I have x squared plus 2x. Leave our blank equals 15. And now once again, take your middle term, which is this one right here. That's your middle coefficient. Divide it in half, which is 1, and then square it. So it'd be 1 squared is 1, so add 1, add 1. So now I have x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 16. So this is going to be x plus 1 squared equals plus or minus the square root of 16. So take the square root of both sides to get rid of that. So we'd have x plus 1 equals plus or minus 4, because the square root of 16 is 4, minus 1, minus 1. So now I'm going to write this up here. So we have x equals negative 1 plus 4 and negative 1 minus 4. So that equals 3, and that equals negative 5. So my answer is going to be then x equals 3 and negative 5. Alright, so the next one is going to be a little bit different too. So we have x squared plus 6x plus 15. So I've already done some of the work, so I put 15 on the other side, left my blank, took my middle term, the 6, took half of that, squared it, got 9. So I added 9 to both sides, so now I have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals negative 6. So this is going to be x plus 3 squared equals negative 6. That's going to be take the square root of both sides, because I want to get rid of that square there. So it'd be x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 6. So now I'm going to subtract 3, so I'd have x equals negative 3 plus the square root of negative 6 and negative 3 minus the square root of negative 6. And you know you can't take the square root of a negative number, so that can be broken down. Negative 6, square root of negative 6 can be broken down into negative 1 times a negative. Let me do that over. Square root of negative 6 can be square root of negative 1 times square root of 6. Square root of negative 1 is an imaginary number, so really what I have here then is negative 3 plus imaginary number times square root of 6 and negative 3 plus imaginary number, and, that should be a minus the square root of 6. So those are my two answers, what x is. So this should be a minus right there. So I hope this lesson is helpful for you. I know it's kind of quick on some things, but go back and watch it and rewatch it, and good luck. Bam!